Welcome to Fright Club. The first rule of Fright Club is you do talk about Fright Club. Based on true events. The bell keeper. The bell consumed me. Not its sound, for silence reigned in Lament Tower these long years, but its presence. A great bronze colossus, cold and immutable, hanging in the throat of the belfry like a god's unspoken judgment. My hands, cracked and calloused as ancient parchment, moved over its curved flank with the reverence of a penitent. Each stroke of the oiled rag was a prayer. Each gleam restored a momentary reprieve. Outside, the wind howled across the salt marshes, a mournful counterpoint to the frantic beating of my own heart. Polish. Preserve. Atonement. Lament Tower was not merely my post. It was my penance, my world, my tomb. It rose from the desolate flats like a broken tooth, black stone against a perpetually bruised sky. No road led to it, only a treacherous path of shifting shingle and sucking mud, swallowed twice daily by the indifferent tide. I had not seen another human face in how long? The calendar in my sparse chamber below the belfry had long since ceased to matter. Days bled into nights, seasons into years, marked only by the slow erosion of the stone around me, and the deepening lines on my own face reflected in the bell's burnished curve. My name is Elias Thorne, once a man of some standing in the coastal town of Saltgrave. Now I am merely the bell keeper, the title, bestowed by the ancient, near-forgotten conclave of tides, carried no honor, only duty and dread. For the bell of lament tolled only once, for each soul fated to die within the tower's shadow. A single, sonorous peal that echoed across the marshes. A final knell for the doomed. For decades, it had been silent. I had hoped, prayed, that my vigil would be one of eternal quiet, that the bell's bronze throat would remain forever sealed. My routine was a liturgy against madness. Dawn found me ascending the spiraling staircase, worn smooth by the tread of generations of keepers before me. The steps groaned beneath my weight, a sound like old bones protesting. The air grew colder, damper, smelling of wet stone, salt, and something else, something faintly metallic, like old blood. The belfry itself was vast, circular, open to the elements through great arching gaps. Seabirds, gulls mostly, would sometimes wheel inside, their cries sharp and alien against the profound silence, before vanishing back into the gray. I would begin my work. The bell required constant attention. Salt spray crept insidiously through the openings, seeking to corrode the sacred bronze. Dust, fine as powdered bone, settled in its intricate carvings, twisted figures, weeping angels, scenes of judgment and despair that seemed to writhe in the shifting light. I knew every line, every flaw, every patch of discoloration. My fingers traced them blindly, a map of my own damnation. The rope, thick as a man's arm, woven from hemp treated with tar and something darker, hung motionless. It felt cold, unnervingly so, like flesh long dead. Today, as I worked, a strange weariness settled upon me, heavier than usual. My hands ached with a deeper pain, the cracks in the skin seeming to widen, to weep a clear, salty fluid. I paused, leaning my forehead against the cool metal of the bell. It vibrated faintly, a low hum that resonated in my bones. Thrum. A single, deep pulse, like the slow beat of a slumbering leviathan. I straightened, startled. Had the wind shifted? No. The air was still. The silence rushed back in, thicker than before, pressing against my eardrums. I looked down. Below, the marshes stretched out, a desolate tapestry of ochre grass and stagnant water, under a sky the color of lead. No boats, no figures. only the endless, sighing reeds and the distant, indifferent crash of the sea. The isolation was absolute. It was a silence that felt watchful, waiting. My gaze fell upon my reflection in the bell's polished surface. A gaunt face stared back, eyes shadowed and sunken, skin stretched taut over prominent cheekbones. My hair, once dark, was now the color of the marsh grass in winter, streaked with gray. The face of a stranger, or perhaps the face I had always carried within, now etched onto the surface by solitude and guilt. Guilt. The word echoed in the hollow space of the belfry, louder than any toll. It was the reason I was here. The reason Saltgrave had exiled me to this wind-scoured pinnacle. The reason the silence felt so heavy, so accusatory. I had taken a life. Not in anger, not in malice, but in a moment of catastrophic weakness, a lapse born of fear and a desperate, foolish need to protect something already lost. The details were a blur of rain-slicked cobblestones, a cry, a sickening crunch, the sudden, terrible stillness of a body on the ground. His name was Thomas, a good man, a friend, and I had stolen his breath, stolen his future, stolen him from those who loved him. The trial had been a formality. The sentence, exile to Lament Tower, was the only mercy the conclave could offer, a chance to serve, to atone through vigilance, until death claimed me or the bell tolled for another. I had chosen the tower over the noose. Sometimes, in the darkest watches of the night, I wondered if I had chosen wisely. Shaking off the memory like a physical weight, I resumed my polishing. The rhythmic scrape of the rag against bronze was the only sound, a monotonous counterpoint to the wind's moan. Scrape, scrape, scrape. My hands burned. I worked faster, driven by a sudden irrational need to finish, to escape the belfry's oppressive atmosphere. The bell seemed to absorb the sound, the light, even my frantic movements. It felt hungry. Finally, it was done. The bell gleamed like a dark star in the gloom of the belfry. I stepped back, admiring my work, a flicker of perverse pride warring with the ever-present dread. It was beautiful, in a terrible, majestic way, a monument to endings. I gathered my rag and oil, turning to descend the spiral stairs. The shadows in the corners of the belfry seemed deeper than before, clinging like wet velvet. As I took my first step down, a sound froze me mid-stride. Clang. A single resonant note, deep and sonorous, rolled out from the bell above. It vibrated through the stone floor, up my legs, into my chest. It wasn't a full toll, not the clarion call of doom. It was more like a sigh, a testing of the air. The sound hung in the sudden, deafening silence that followed, echoing not just in the belfry, but in the hollow chamber of my own chest. I stood rigid, 1 foot on the step below, my breath caught in my throat. My eyes darted upwards. The bell hung motionless. The rope was still. No wind stirred. No bird had struck it. Clang again. Softer this time, but unmistakable. A metallic sigh, resonant and chilling. It seemed to come from within the bell itself, not from any external blow. Slowly, deliberately, I turned back towards it. The polished surface reflected my terrified face, pale and distorted. And in the depths of the bronze, beneath my own image, I thought I saw something else. A flicker, a shift in the light, or a pair of eyes, ancient and knowing, opening within the metal to stare directly at me. The silence rushed back in, thicker than ever, pressing down like a physical weight. The bell was silent once more, but I knew, with a certainty that froze my blood, that it had spoken, and it had spoken my name. The echo lingered. not in the belfry's vast, cold space, but within me. That single, resonant clang had vibrated through my bones, settling in the marrow like a shard of ice. I stood frozen on the spiral stair, one hand gripping the worn stone balustrade, knuckles white. The bell hung motionless above, a great, dark eye staring down. Had I imagined it? The silence that followed was absolute, heavier than before, pressing against my eardrums, thick enough to choke on. The wind outside had died, leaving only the frantic, shallow rhythm of my own breathing. Thrum. It came again, softer this time. A deep vibration felt more than heard, originating not from the bell itself, but from the very stone beneath my feet. It pulsed upwards, a slow, deliberate heartbeat emanating from the tower's ancient core. I recoiled, stumbling back a step, my back hitting the cold wall, my heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. It spoke. The bell spoke. Not words, but a sound pregnant with meaning, a summons, a judgment. The silence rushed back in, but it was no longer empty. It was watchful, waiting. I fled the belfry, not walked, fled. My descent was a clumsy, stumbling rush, my boots scraping loud on the stone steps, each sound a blasphemy in the oppressive quiet. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see the bell's polished surface, to risk seeing those eyes again, or worse, my own terrified reflection superimposed over them. The air grew warmer, damper, smelling of mildew and disuse, as I descended past my own chamber, deeper into the tower's forgotten guts. I needed to be away from it, to breathe air not tinged with the scent of ancient bronze and impending doom. I found myself in the undercroft, a vaulted chamber beneath the tower's base, rarely visited. It smelled of earth, salt, and damp stone. Slivers of weak gray light filtered through high, barred slits, illuminating dust motes dancing like tormented spirits. Here, surrounded by the cold, dead weight of the foundation, I sank onto a moldering crate, burying my face in my hands. My hands, they burned. The cracks across my palms and knuckles, already deep and ugly, seemed to have widened in the moments since the tolling. They wept a clear, viscous fluid that felt unnaturally warm against my chilled skin. I stared at them in the dim light, fascinated and horrified. They looked used, as if I'd spent hours not polishing but tearing at stone with my bare flesh. Was it real? The question echoed in the hollow space of my mind, louder than the bell. Could the bell toll without a ringer? Logic, that fragile reed in the tempest of my fear, struggled to assert itself. The wind? A freak gust, strong enough to set the great clapper swinging? Possible. But the silence after, the stillness, the feeling of being watched, of being known. No, the wind didn't leave echoes in the blood. It didn't make ancient stone pulse like a dying heart. And it certainly didn't carve deeper cracks into a man's hands. I pressed my palms together, wincing at the sting. The weeping fluid felt slick, almost oily. I rubbed it between my thumb and forefinger. It was warm and faintly metallic, like blood, but older, darker. The scent of it rose to my nostrils, iron, salt, and something else. Something ancient and corrupt, like rusted metal left in a tomb. My stomach churned. I wiped my hands frantically on my rough-spun trousers, leaving dark, damp streaks. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time in Lament Tower had lost its anchor, drifting like flotsam in the gray sea of my isolation. I remained in the undercroft, huddled on the crate, listening. To what? The silence was now a presence. A third entity in the room beside myself in the cold stone. It pressed in, thick and suffocating. And then, beneath it, a sound, a whisper, not carried on the wind, not from the belfry above. It seemed to come from the walls themselves, a sibilant sigh that curled around the edges of my consciousness. Elias, my name. Spoken not with malice, but with a terrible, weary familiarity. I jerked upright, my head snapping towards the sound. Nothing, only the damp, sweating stone and the dancing dust. Elias, louder this time, or perhaps closer. It seemed to emanate from the corner of the vault, where shadows pooled thickest. I strained my ears, my breath held tight in my chest. It wasn't a voice, not truly. It was more like the sound air makes when forced through a narrow crack, shaped by intention. Keeper, who's there? My voice was a croak, swallowed instantly by the oppressive silence. The whispering ceased. The only sound was the frantic thudding of my own heart. I laughed then, a harsh, brittle sound that echoed unnervingly in the confined space. Madness. It's finally found you, Elias Thorne. The isolation, the guilt, the crushing weight of the tower, they had broken me. I was hearing whispers in stone, seeing eyes in bronze. The bell hadn't told. It was all in my mind. But even as I tried to cling to that fragile rationalization, a movement caught my eye. Near the base of the far wall, where the shadows lay deepest, a patch of darkness seemed to shift. It coalesced, thickened, taking on a vaguely humanoid shape for a fleeting second. Tall, gaunt, indistinct. It wasn't solid, not like a person. It was more like a hole cut into the fabric of the world, a patch of deeper darkness that absorbed the weak light. It hung there for a heartbeat, two, then dissolved back into the surrounding gloom as if it had never been. I scrambled backwards, the crate scraping loudly on the stone floor. My back hit the opposite wall. I stared at the spot where it had been, my eyes wide, refusing to blink, afraid it would reappear the moment I looked away. The silence pressed in, thicker than ever. The metallic scent from my hands seemed to fill the undercroft. Elias. The whisper came again, not from the wall this time, but seemingly from right beside my ear. I flinched violently, a cry escaping my lips. Clang. The sound exploded from above, not a sigh this time, but a full, resonant toll that shook the very foundations of the tower. Dust rained down from the vaulted ceiling. The stone beneath me vibrated violently. The sound was immense, physical. A blow struck not just against the air, but against my soul. It rolled out across the marshes, a clarion call of doom that silenced even the wind. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it was useless. The tolling wasn't just sound, it was inside me, vibrating in my bones, in my teeth, in the fractured chambers of my heart. It was the sound of judgment, the sound of an ending. And as the final, dying echo faded, replaced once more by that terrible, watchful silence, I knew with a certainty that froze the blood in my veins. The bell had tolled. It had tolled for me. The tolling's echo faded, but its resonance lingered in my bones, a cold ache that settled deep within my marrow. I fled the undercroft, not towards the belfry. That sacred, accursed space was forbidden now, but upwards, towards the meager sanctuary of my chamber. The spiral stairs, usually merely groaning underfoot, seemed to writhe beneath me. The stone felt slick, unnaturally cold, as if the tower itself wept the chill of the grave. Each step was a battle against an unseen force pushing down, against the weight of the silence that had rushed back in, heavier and more accusatory than before. My chamber was a Spartan cell carved into the tower's flank, high enough to glimpse the gray expanse of marsh and sea through a single arrow-slit window. A narrow cot, a rough-hewn table bearing a candle stub and my journal, a stool. That was all. It should have felt like a refuge. Today, it felt like a cage. The shadows clung to the corners, deeper than the weak daylight warranted. The air was frigid, carrying the persistent scent of damp stone and something else. The metallic tang from my hands, that coppery tomb-like smell seemed to permeate the very stones. I sank onto the stool, cradling my hands. They were worse. The cracks had deepened into raw, weeping fissures, the skin around them swollen and inflamed. The clear fluid they oozed was thicker now, tinged faintly pink. It left dark, sticky smears on the table's surface. I stared at them, mesmerized by the slow, rhythmic drip, drip, drip onto the wood. Each drop seemed to echo the tolling bell, a miniature, personal knell. Drip, toll, drip, toll. The rhythm synced with the frantic pounding in my chest. Elias! The whisper slithered into the room, not through the door or window, but from the walls themselves. It was clearer now, less sibilant breath, more shaped in tension. It coiled around the base of my skull, cold and insistent. I froze, my breath catching. My eyes darted to the corners, to the shadows pooling beneath the cot. Nothing moved. Only the dust motes danced in the thin shaft of light. Thorn. It came again, sharper, closer. It seemed to emanate from the stones directly behind me. I whipped around, pressing my back against the cold wall, my heart hammering against my ribs like a frantic prisoner. The wall felt alive. Beneath the chill damp, I imagined a faint vibration, a slow, deliberate pulse matching the thrum that had shaken the tower earlier. The stones were breathing, or perhaps remembering. "Show yourself!" I rasped, the sound swallowed by the oppressive silence. The whispering ceased. The only response was the relentless drip, drip, drip of my hands onto the table. The metallic scent grew stronger, filling the small chamber, cloying and thick. I gagged, stumbling towards the window, desperate for air that didn't taste of my own decay. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass, staring out at the desolate marshes. The gray sea merged seamlessly with the bruised sky. No birds flew, no boats moved. The world outside was as dead as the world within the tower's walls. And then, unbidden, the memory surged up. Not a gentle recollection, but a violent intrusion, forced upon me by the watching silence, the breathing stones. Rain, lashing down, turning Saltgrave's cobbled streets into slick, treacherous rivers. Night. The only light came from flickering lanterns swinging wildly in the gale, casting monstrous, dancing shadows. Thomas. His face, pale in the lantern glow, etched with concern. "Elias, you can't keep this up. The conclave knows." His words cut off by my own desperate cry. "They'll take her. They'll lock her away." I saw the fear in his eyes then, not for me, but of me. He took a step back, hands raised placatingly. "No one's taking anyone. Just listen." The slick cobblestones beneath my worn boots, a lurch. A desperate grab for his arm to steady myself, his surprised grunt. The sickening, wet crunch as his head struck the sharp corner of the stone well. The sudden, terrible stillness. The rain washing the spreading crimson stain into the gutters. The lantern light catching his open, sightless eyes, reflecting nothing but the black, rain-filled sky. My own scream, raw and animalistic, lost in the storm's fury. I gasped, pulling back from the window as if burned. My hands were pressed against the glass, leaving bloody smears. The memory had been so vivid, so present. I could smell the rain, feel the cold cobblestones, hear the awful finality of that impact. And beneath it all, the whispering began again, not from the walls this time, but seemingly from the very air I breathed. Elias, Thorn, murderer. The words were distinct now, layered, overlapping, a chorus of accusation whispered by countless unseen voices. They swirled around me, cold as grave mist. I clapped my bleeding hands over my ears, but it was useless. The whispers weren't sound. They were inside my head, vibrating in my skull, seeping into my thoughts. Thomas. The name was hissed, sharp and cruel, cutting through the chorus like a knife. Thomas. 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 No! I roared, staggering away from the window, knocking the stool over with a clatter. I pressed my back against the wall opposite the window, facing the center of the room, my eyes wide, darting wildly. The whispers intensified, a cacophony of my name, Thomas's name, the word murderer repeated like a damning litany. The shadows in the corners deepened, writhing like living things. The air grew impossibly cold, frosting my breath. The metallic smell of blood was overwhelming, choking me. And then, through the storm of whispers, through the suffocating cold and the stench of decay, came a new sound. A faint, rhythmic creak, creak, creak. It came from above, from the belfry. My head snapped up towards the ceiling. The sound was unmistakable. It was the sound of the great bell rope swaying gently in its housing, swaying without wind, swaying without a hand to guide it. Creak, creak, creak. It was a slow, deliberate movement, like the pendulum of a clock counting down to oblivion. The whispers suddenly coalesced, merging into a single agonized sound that ripped through the chamber and through my soul. It wasn't a word, it was a gasp, a wet, rattling, final exhalation of breath. The sound Thomas had made as he died. The sound that haunted my every sleeping moment, and now my waking ones. The creaking of the rope ceased. The whispers fell silent. The oppressive coal lifted slightly, leaving only the bone-deep chill of the tower and the relentless drip, drip, drip of my hands onto the floorboards. I slid down the wall, collapsing onto the cold stone, my body trembling uncontrollably. I curled into myself, pressing my bleeding hands against my ears, trying to block out the silence, trying to block out the memory of that final, terrible gasp. But it was etched into me now, as deep as the cracks in my skin, as permanent as the bronze bell hanging above. The tower had spoken, the bell had tolled, and the whispers had named me, murderer. The word hung in the silent chamber heavier than any toll. The journal lay open on the table, its pages stained with the dark, viscous fluid weeping from my hands. My attempt to document the tolling, the whispers, the gasp, had degenerated into a scrawling, bloody mess. Words smeared, sentences fractured, the ink mixing with the coppery ooze until the page resembled a battlefield. Toll, whisper, Thomas, murderer, gasping. The words swam before my eyes, accusations written in my own failing blood. I slammed the book shut, the sound unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence of my chamber. The shadows clung to the corners like shrouds, deeper and more substantial than before. The tower felt alive, its ancient stones breathing slowly, deliberately around me. Days bled into nights. Or was it merely hours? Time had lost all meaning in Lament Tower, marked only by the relentless deterioration of my body and the escalating torment of my mind. My hands were grotesque. The cracks had widened into raw, weeping chasms, the skin around them swollen and purple. The fluid they oozed was no longer clear, but a thick, dark ichor that smelled of rust and rot. It left sticky, black smears on everything I touched. The cot, the table, the walls. I tried to bind them with strips torn from my bedding, but the cloth soaked through instantly, turning dark and foul. The pain was constant, a deep, bone-aching throb that echoed the tolling bell still resonating in my memory. I avoided the belfry. The very thought of ascending those spiraling stairs filled me with a dread so profound it bordered on paralysis. But the silence was worse. It was a presence, a watchful, waiting entity that pressed in from all sides. And the whispers, they never truly stopped. They were a constant, low-level murmur beneath the surface of my thoughts, like insects crawling behind the walls. Elias, Keeper, Toll, Thomas. Sometimes they would coalesce into that single devastating gasp, freezing my blood and stopping my heart. I spent most of my time huddled in my chamber, staring at the arrow-slit window, watching the gray marshes merge with the gray sky. The world outside was as dead as the world within. But the tower was awake. I felt it in the subtle vibrations that shivered through the stone floor, in the way the cold air seemed to move with purpose, in the oppressive weight of the silence that wasn't silence at all, but a held breath. Then came the footsteps. Not the groaning of the stairs under my own weight, but something else. A slow, dragging scrape, coming from the level below my chamber, from the archives. I hadn't ventured there in years. It was a cramped, forgotten space filled with crumbling ledgers and mildewed records of the conclave's long-dead members. The sound was unmistakable. The scrape of a boot on stone, heavy, labored, as if the walker carried a great burden or was grievously wounded. Scrape, drag, pause, scrape, drag. My breath hitched. I pressed myself against the cold wall beside the door, listening. The sound ceased. Silence rushed back in, thicker than ever. Had I imagined it? Another symptom of my unraveling mind? I held my breath, straining my ears until they ached. Nothing. Only the frantic hammering of my own heart and the faint, rhythmic drip, drip, drip of my hands onto the floorboards. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. It started again, closer this time, just outside my door. I froze, my eyes wide in the gloom. The handle began to turn, slowly, silently. The old iron mechanism, usually stiff and noisy, moved with an unnatural smoothness. The door inched open. A figure stood silhouetted in the doorway, backlit by the weak, gray light filtering from the stairwell below. It was tall, impossibly gaunt, wrapped in tattered dark rags that hung loosely on a skeletal frame. Its head was bowed, obscuring its face. One hand rested on the doorframe. It was skeletal, the skin stretched tight over prominent bones, the fingers ending in ragged, blackened nails. It dripped, not water, but the same dark ichor that oozed from my own hands, leaving glistening spots on the stone floor. It took a step into the room. Its movement was jerky, unnatural, a puppet pulled by unseen strings. The scraping sound came from its left leg, which dragged uselessly behind it, leaving a wet, dark trail on the flagstones. The air grew colder, the metallic scent of blood and decay intensifying until it choked me. The whispers rose in a sudden, deafening chorus inside my skull. Elias, Thorn, murderer, Thomas. The figure raised its head, and I saw. It wasn't a face, it was a ruin. The skin was gray and waxy, stretched taut over the skull. The eyes were gone, replaced by weeping holes that oozed the same dark ichor. The nose was merely a flattened ridge of cartilage. The mouth was a gaping, ragged hole, twisted into a silent scream, and hanging from the jaw, swaying slightly with the movement, was a single, dark, familiar object. A small, tarnished bell, the bell Thomas had worn on his watch fob, a gift from his wife, a bell that had tinkled softly whenever he moved, a bell that had been silent since the night I killed him. The figure took another dragging step towards me, its skeletal hand outstretched, the dripping fingers curling into a grasping claw. The whispers inside my head reached a fever pitch, merging into a single, agonized shriek that was both mine and Thomas's. The gaping maw seemed to widen, the darkness within it absolute. Hungry. Elias. The voice that emerged was not a whisper. It was a dry, rattling hiss, like stones grinding together, like death itself finding its voice. You rang. The realization struck me like a physical blow, colder and more final than the marsh wind. This wasn't a ghost. This wasn't a figment of my madness. This was consequence. This was the bell's answer. This was the tolling made flesh, the tolling for me. A scream tore from my throat, raw and primal, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. It echoed in the small chamber, bouncing off the stone walls, a desperate human sound in the face of utter, inhuman horror. The figure flinched back slightly, its head tilting, as if startled by the noise. Then, slowly, deliberately, it raised its skeletal hand. The dangling bell on its jaw swung gently. Ting! A single, clear, impossibly loud note chimed in the confined space. It wasn't the deep toll of the great bell above, but a high, piercing sound that vibrated in my teeth, in my bones, in the fractured remnants of my sanity. It was the sound of a tiny hammer striking a tiny, cursed bell. The sound of final judgment. The figure dissolved, not like smoke, but like a shadow snuffed out. One moment it was there, dripping and dreadful. The next, only the lingering smell of decay and the dark, wet trail on the floor remained. The oppressive cold lifted slightly. The whispers in my head fell silent, leaving only the ringing echo of that tiny, terrible ting and the frantic, sobbing gasps of my own breath. I slid down the wall, collapsing onto the cold stone floor, my body trembling violently. I curled into a tight ball, pressing my ruined hands against my ears, trying to block out the silence, trying to block out the memory of that face, that voice, that tiny, damning bell. But it was etched into me now, deeper than the cracks in my skin, more permanent than the bronze bell hanging above. The tower had spoken. The bell had tolled. And the apparition had shown me the face of my own damnation. It wore Thomas's bell, and it was coming for me. The silence after the apparition's departure was worse than any sound. It wasn't empty. It was thick, cloying, like the air in a sealed tomb. I remained curled on the cold stone floor of my chamber, trembling uncontrollably, the echo of that tiny, damning ting still vibrating in my teeth. The dark, wet trail left by the skeletal figure seemed to pulse faintly in the gloom, a malevolent vein leading back to the archives below. The metallic stench of decay and blood hung heavy, mixing with the ever-present damp chill of the tower. My hands throbbed, a deep, sickening ache. The weeping ichor now a slow, steady trickle that soaked through the makeshift bandages and pooled on the flagstones. Thomas's bell. The thought was a shard of ice in my mind. The apparition hadn't just worn it, it was part of it, a grotesque ornament dangling from the ruin of its jaw. A bell tolling for me. The bell I had silenced. The tower wasn't just haunted, it was sentient. And it knew my crime. It was feeding on my guilt, manifesting my deepest terror. Hours passed, or perhaps only minutes. Time had lost its anchor, adrift in the sea of my madness. The whispers returned, not as a chorus, but as a single, insidious voice slithering through the cracks in the stone. Elias. It hissed. The books know. I jerked upright, my head snapping towards the door. The archives, the crumbling ledgers and mildewed records I'd avoided for years. What could they possibly tell me that I didn't already know? That I was damned, that the tower was my prison and my executioner. Yet the tower's voice, insisted. Answers. Below, a desperate, irrational hope flickered within me, fragile as a dying ember. Answers. Perhaps there was a way to stop this. A ritual, a ward, something the previous keepers had known. Something to break the cycle before the bell tolled its final, inevitable note for me. The hope was a poison, but it was sweeter than the suffocating despair. I pushed myself up, my muscles screaming in protest. My legs felt weak, unsteady. I stumbled towards the door, leaving dark, sticky footprints in my wake. The air grew colder as I descended the spiral stairs, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the tower's oppressive will. The stones seemed to lean in, the shadows deepening, coalescing into fleeting, indistinct shapes at the edge of my vision. The whispers followed me, a constant, sibilant commentary, down, down, to the roots, to the truth. The archive's door was heavy oak, iron-banded, swollen with damp. It resisted my push, groaning in protest as if the tower itself tried to bar my way. I threw my weight against it, my ruined hands screaming in agony where they pressed against the rough wood. With a final, splintering crack, it gave way. The air that rushed out to meet me was ancient, thick with the scent of decaying paper, mildew and dust, so profound it felt like a physical weight. It was colder than the rest of the tower, a tomb-like chill that seeped into my bones. Weak, gray light filtered through a high, grime-caked window, illuminating countless shelves sagging under the weight of leather-bound tomes, scrolls, and crumbling ledgers. Dust motes danced in the thin beams, like tormented spirits. The silence here was different, deeper, older, layered with the weight of forgotten centuries. I moved cautiously, my boots disturbing centuries of undisturbed dust. The whispers guided me, not towards the neatly organized records of the conclave, but towards a shadowed corner where shelves leaned precariously, spilling their contents onto the floor in a jumble of mildewed parchment and cracked leather bindings. There, the voice hissed. The Keeper's Chronicles. I knelt, wincing at the pain in my joints, and began to sift through the debris. The parchments crumbled at my touch, releasing puffs of dust that made me cough. My hands left dark smears on everything they touched. Finally, my fingers closed on a volume bound in black leather, strangely supple despite its age. It bore no title, only a single, tarnished brass clasp shaped like a bell. I fumbled it open, the dry pages whispering secrets as they turned. The entries were written in a spidery, fading hand, the ink sometimes obscured by mildew or water damage. They spanned centuries, each entry the record of a bellkeeper, and each one told the same story with chilling, repetitive precision. Day 47, the silence breathes, my hands ache, the skin splitting like old fruit. I hear whispers in the walls at night. They say my name. Keeper Alistair, Year of Our Lord, 1623. Day 91. The bell tolled without hand, a single, mournful note. I saw a shape in the belfry, tall and thin, dragging its leg. It wore the face of the man I wronged. It smiled with teeth of shadow. Keeper Silas, Year of Our Lord, 1748. Day 112. The books lie. There is no escape. The tower is hungry. It feeds on guilt. It is guilt made stone. My hands weep black tears. The whispers are screams now. It comes for me. I hear the rope creak. Keeper Jonah, year of our Lord, 1811. I read faster, my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of bone. Keeper after keeper. The same progression. Isolation, guilt, physical decay, always the hands. The first tolling, the whispers, the apparition wearing the face of their victim, the growing terror, the final, desperate entries, and always the same ending. The entries stopped abruptly. No final words of peace, no record of release. Only silence. And the next keeper's chronicle beginning years, sometimes decades, later. A pattern emerged. A horrific, inescapable cycle. The tower didn't just punish, it consumed. It took the keeper's guilt, their crime, and manifested it, feeding on their terror until they broke, until the bell tolled its final note for them. Then it waited, dormant, until the next guilty soul was assigned to its care. I was just the latest link in a chain of damnation stretching back centuries. My hands trembled violently as I turned the pages, searching, needing to find an anomaly, a survivor, a way out. The entries blurred before my eyes, the names and dates merging into a litany of despair. And then, near the end of the chronicle, I found it. Not an entry of hope, but one of profound, soul-shattering prophecy. It was written in a different hand, bolder, yet filled with a frantic energy. The ink was fresh, black, and seemed to glisten wetly in the dim light. It was dated only a week ago. He comes, the final keeper, the one whose guilt is a black star. The tower stirs for him. The bell hungers for his name. Elias Thorne. His hands will bleed the tower's memory. His breath will feed the whispers. His terror will be the sweetest wine. He will climb the stairs. He will see the truth in the bronze. He will toll his own end. The cycle breaks with him. The tower will sleep or wake anew. The prophecy is sealed. The bell knows his name, Elias Thorne. The name lipped from the page, written in large, jagged strokes that seemed to burn into my retinas. Elias Thorne. Not just a name, a verdict. A death sentence written by the tower itself, perhaps by the last keeper before me, or by the malevolent intelligence that resided within the stone and bronze. A cold dread, deeper and more absolute than anything I had yet experienced, washed over me. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the chilling certainty of inevitability. The tower hadn't just been waiting for a keeper. It had been waiting for me. My guilt was the key. My crime was the sacrifice. The bell didn't just toll for death. It caused it, harvesting the soul of the guilty to sustain its dark existence. I slammed the chronicle shut, the brass bell clasp clinking softly. The sound echoed unnaturally in the silent archives. The whispers rose again, no longer sibilant, but a triumphant mocking chorus. Elias! 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 I scrambled backwards, away from the book, away from the damning prophecy. My back hit a shelf, sending a cascade of crumbling parchments to the floor. The dust rose like a shroud. The shadows in the corners of the archives deepened, writhing, coalescing. The air grew impossibly cold, frosting my breath. The metallic scent of blood and decay intensified, choking me. And from the depths of the tower, far below, came a sound that froze the blood in my veins. Not a toll, not a whisper, but the slow, deliberate, grinding creak, creak, creak of the great bell rope beginning to sway once more in the belfry above. It was calling me. The rope was calling me. The stairs awaited. The ascent had begun. The tower had my name, and it would not rest until it had my soul. I was trapped, not just in stone, but in the pages of a prophecy written in my own blood. The final tolling was coming. And it would toll for me. The creaking of the rope above was a summons, a slow, deliberate creak, 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 that vibrated through the stone floor, up my legs into the fractured chambers of my heart. It wasn't just sound, it was a physical pull, an invisible hand gripping my spine, urging me upward. The prophecy in the chronicles burned behind my eyes. He will climb the stairs. He will see the truth in the bronze. He will toll his own end. The tower knew my name. It knew my crime, and it hungered. I fled the archives, not towards the belfry. That path was still barred by primal terror, but upwards, back to my chamber. The spiral stairs groaned beneath my weight, but the sound was different now. It sounded like laughter, low, guttural, stone-deep laughter that mocked my flight. The air grew colder with each step, the shadows clinging to the walls thickening, reaching out with tenebrous fingers. The whispers followed, no longer sibilant, but a chorus of dry, rattling voices. Climb, Elias, climb and see the truth. See your end. My chamber felt smaller, more oppressive than ever. The single arrow-slit window offered no comfort, only a view of the gray, indifferent marshes merging with the bruised sky. The metallic scent of decay was overwhelming, clinging to every surface, mingling with the coppery reek of my own weeping hands. They were worse, much worse. The cracks had widened into raw, gaping fissures, revealing tissue beneath that was unnaturally dark, almost bruised. The ichor they oozed was thick, black, and viscous, like crude oil mixed with old blood. It left glistening, tar-like smears on everything I touched. The pain was constant, a deep, sickening throb that echoed the creaking rope above. I needed to see, needed to understand the extent of the tower's corruption. My gaze fell upon the small, tarnished hand mirror I kept on the rough-hewn table. A relic from my life before Saltgrave, before Thomas, before this damnable tower. I hadn't looked into it in weeks, months. The thought of seeing my own face filled me with a dread deeper than the marsh mud. But the whispers hissed, "Look, look and know." With a trembling hand, leaving a sticky black smear on the table, I picked up the mirror. It felt cold, unnaturally so, as if it had been resting in a tomb. I raised it slowly, my breath catching in my throat. The face that stared back was not mine. Or rather, it was a grotesque parody of me. The skin was stretched taut over the skull, gray and waxy like the apparition's. The eyes were sunken, shadowed pits, but within them something moved. A faint, malevolent light, like embers glowing in ashes. The cheekbones were sharp, prominent, casting deep, cavernous shadows. The lips were cracked, bleeding slightly, pulled back in a rictus that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite a snarl. My hair, once merely streaked with gray, was now the color of iron filings, matted and unkempt. But it was the hands that held me transfixed. In the mirror, they weren't just bleeding ichor, they were changing. The skin around the fissures was darkening, hardening, taking on the texture of weathered bronze. The black fluid oozing from the cracks seemed to shimmer faintly, like oil on water, reflecting the weak light in impossible ways. It looked less like blood and more like molten metal. The hands of a keeper, becoming the very thing he kept. Elias. The voice that emerged from my reflection's mouth was not mine. It was dry, rasping, layered with the whispers of the tower. You see the truth." I recoiled, dropping the mirror with a clatter. It landed face up on the table, the reflection still staring up at the ceiling, its lips moving silently. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the cold stone wall. My ruined hands clutched to my chest. No, it's a trick. The mirror, the light, the tower's influence. But the image was seared into my mind. The bronze-like skin, the embers in the eyes, the voice that wasn't mine. You cannot hide. The voice came again, not from the mirror but from the walls themselves. It surrounded me, pressing in. The bell knows you. The tower is you. Your guilt is its mortar. Your terror is its breath. I slid down the wall, collapsing onto the floor, my body racked with tremors. I stared at my hands, held before me in the dim light. They looked wrong. The skin was hardening, taking on a dull, metallic sheen. The black ichor oozing from the cracks seemed thicker, slower, like a cooling slag. The pain was still there, but it was changing, becoming a deep, resonant ache, a vibration that matched the creaking of the rope above. Drip, creak, drip, creak. The sounds synchronized, a grotesque rhythm of decay and summons. The whispers rose again, a cacophony of voices, Thomas's gasp, the dry rattle of the apparition, the sibilant hiss of the tower, and now the layered metallic tones of my own reflection. Murderer, keeper, toll, climb, see, end. They swirled around me, a vortex of sound and accusation. The air grew colder, frosting my breath. The shadows in the corners deepened, writhing, taking on indistinct, menacing shapes. The metallic scent intensified until I could taste it, sharp and bitter on my tongue. And then, through the storm of sound and sensation came a new sound, a faint, rhythmic tapping. It came from the belfry above, sharp and distinct against the creaking rope. Tap, tap, tap. It sounded like metal striking stone, like the clapper of the great bell tapping lightly against its bronze side. Testing, waiting. The tower was growing impatient. The summons was becoming a command. I pushed myself up, my movements clumsy, stiff. My hands felt heavy, alien. I looked towards the door, towards the spiral stairs leading upwards, the path to the belfry, the path to my doom. The prophecy echoed, "He will climb the stairs. He will toll his own end." Was there any other choice? To stay here? To let the tower consume me slowly? To become another name in the chronicles? Another entry ending in abrupt silence? Or to meet it head-on? To ascend? To see the truth in the bronze? A strange, desperate resolve began to form amidst the terror. Not hope, but defiance. If the bell wanted me, if the tower demanded my soul, then I would not go quietly. I would not let it simply feed on my fear. I would face it. I would look into the eye of the storm, and perhaps I could destroy it. The thought was madness, born of desperation and the tower's insidious influence, but it took root. Destroy the bell, break the cycle, end the hunger. I looked at my hands again. The bronze-like sheen was more pronounced. The black ichor oozed slower. They were becoming part of the tower's mechanism, part of the bell. Drip, toll, drip, toll. The rhythm was inescapable. The tapping above grew louder, more insistent. Tap, tap, tap. The creaking of the rope quickened. Creak, creak, creak. The whispers rose to a fever pitch. Climb, climb, climb. I took a step towards the door, then another. The tower seemed to lean in, the stones groaning in anticipation. The air crackled with unseen energy. The shadows writhed like living things. The metallic scent was a physical presence, choking me. My hands throbbed in time with the bell rope, a deep, resonant ache that was both agony and a dark, terrible purpose. I reached the door. My ruined hand, slick with black ichor, closed around the cold iron handle. It felt like grasping the hilt of a sword pointed at my own heart. The tower held its breath. The whispers fell silent, waiting. The tapping and creaking above ceased. An absolute, watchful silence descended, heavier than any toll. I turned the handle. The door groaned open, revealing the spiral stairs ascending into darkness. The path to the belfry, the path to the truth, the path to my end. I took the first step upwards. The stone felt cold, final beneath my boot. The tower sighed around me, a sound of ancient stone and darker anticipation. The ascent had begun. There was no turning back. The bell knew my name, and I was going to meet it. The spiral staircase coiled upwards into darkness, a throat of stone waiting to swallow me whole. I stood at its base, my ruined hand still clutching the cold iron handle of my chamber door, the other slick with black ichor that dripped onto the flagstones. Each drop fell with a soft, wet pat, echoing unnaturally in the suffocating silence. Above, the belfry waited. The bell waited. My end waited. But a new, desperate fire flickered within the hollow cavity of my chest. Not hope, but defiance. If the tower demanded my soul, I would not surrender it meekly. I would strike first. I would destroy the bell. The resolve felt alien, fragile as spun glass in the crushing weight of the tower's malevolence. Every instinct screamed at me to flee back into my chamber, to curl into a ball and await the inevitable. But the prophecy burned in my mind. He will toll his own end. The words felt like a chain around my neck. If my end was written, then I would choose the manner of it. I would not be the bell's puppet. I would be its executioner. First, I needed tools, something heavy, sharp, capable of shattering sacred bronze. The thought of ascending the stairs empty-handed was unbearable. I turned away from the stairwell, moving not upwards but downwards, towards the undercroft where the tower's detritus gathered. Broken furniture, rusted implements, the discarded remnants of forgotten keepers. The air grew colder, damper, smelling of earth and rot. The whispers followed, no longer triumphant but confused, angry. Down, no, up, the bell calls. Silence, I rasped, the sound raw and ragged in my own throat. To my astonishment, the whispers faltered, receding like a tide. For a fleeting moment, the silence was merely silence, not a presence. The reprieve was brief. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the stone floor, originating from deep within the tower's foundations. It was the sound of displeasure, of a great beast disturbed. I found the undercroft unchanged, vaulted, shadowed, smelling of salt and mildew. Weak light filtered through high slits, illuminating dust motes dancing like tormented souls. I began to sift through the piles of junk, my movements clumsy, hampered by the grotesque transformation of my hands. They felt stiff, unyielding, the skin hardening into a dull, bronze-like sheen. The black ichor oozed slowly, thick as tar, leaving glistening trails on everything I touched. Pain lanced through them with every movement, a deep, grinding ache that resonated with the tower's hum. My fingers closed around something heavy and solid, a rusted iron crowbar, its end chipped but still massive. It felt unnaturally cold, leaching what little warmth remained in my hands. Next, I found a heavy-headed sledgehammer, its wooden handle splintered but solid. I tested my grip. The bronze-like skin of my palms scraped painfully against the rough wood, but the ichor seemed to provide a slick, unnatural purchase. I could hold it, barely. As I lifted the sledgehammer, a wave of dizziness washed over me. The undercroft tilted, swam. I leaned against the cold stone wall, gasping. My reflection stared back at me from a discarded water-filled bucket nearby. It was worse than the mirror. The face was gaunt, skeletal, the eyes glowing faintly with that malevolent ember light. But the hands gripping the sledgehammer were no longer merely bronze-like. They were bronze, dark, pitted metal, fused seamlessly to my wrists, the crack sweeping black fluid that shimmered like oil. The fingers were thick, jointed, utterly inhuman. You become. The voice emerged from my reflection's lips, dry and metallic, layered with the tower's whispers. You become the instrument, the hammer, the bell. No, I snarled, hurling the sledgehammer away from me. It clanged loudly against the stone floor, the sound echoing unnaturally. I stumbled back, tripping over a pile of rotting timbers, landing hard on my backside. Pain shot through me, but it was distant, muffled by the horror consuming me. I stared at my hands, held before me in the dim light. They were changing faster now. The bronze was creeping up my forearms, darkening the skin, hardening it. The ichor flowed slower, thicker. I was becoming part of the tower, part of the bell. The prophecy wasn't just about my death. It was about my transformation. He will toll his own end. The words took on a new, terrifying meaning. Not that I would cause the tolling, but that I would be the tolling. My hands fused to the bell, striking it endlessly for eternity. A living clapper in a prison of bronze and stone. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over me, threatening to extinguish the fragile flame of defiance. What was the point? The tower had already claimed me. My body was betraying me, becoming the very thing I sought to destroy. I was doomed, not just to die, but to become the curse. Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from above, sharp and insistent. The clapper, tapping against the bell. Not a toll, but a reminder, a summons. The tower was growing impatient. The whispers rose again. A cacophony of voices. Time, time. The bell hungers. Climb. I pushed myself up, my movements stiff, alien. The bronze-like skin of my hands scraped against the stone floor as I pushed. I looked at the discarded crowbar and sledgehammer. They were useless now. My hands were the tools. My hands were the weapons. Or they would be the instruments of my eternal enslavement. A new resolve, born not of hope, but of utter desperation, hardened within me. If I was becoming the bell, then I would use that transformation. I would ascend. I would reach the belfry. And I would strike the bell with all the force of my corrupted flesh, my damned soul. I would shatter it, or I would shatter with it. Either way, the cycle ended. The tower's hunger would be denied, or it would consume its own instrument. I picked up the crowbar. It felt lighter now, or perhaps my hands were stronger. The bronze skin seemed to grip the rusted iron naturally. I slung the sledgehammer over my shoulder, the splintered handle digging into the corrupted flesh. The pain was still there, but it felt distant, a separate thing. The dominant sensation was the deep, resonant ache in my hands, the vibration that matched the tower's hum and the tapping above. Drip, tap, drip, tap. The rhythm was inescapable, a heartbeat of doom. I turned towards the spiral stairs. The air grew colder, the shadows deepening, writhing like living things. The whispers intensify, no longer confused but furious. Fool, destroyer, you cannot break what you are. You are the bell. You are the tower. The stones beneath my feet vibrated. A low, grinding sound echoed from the walls, as if the tower itself was shifting, preparing to block my path. The stairwell ahead seemed to narrow, the darkness thickening into a physical barrier. The metallic scent of decay intensified, choking me. I took the first step onto the spiral stair. The stone felt cold, final, but also yielding, as if the tower was testing my resolve, as if it was intrigued by this final, futile act of defiance. I took the second step. The grinding sound ceased. The whispers fell silent, replaced by a watchful, expectant hush. The tapping above stopped. The tower held its breath. I began to climb, one step at a time. The crowbar felt heavy in my bronze hand. The sledgehammer dug into my shoulder. My ruined hands throbbed in a time with the tower's deep, resonant hum. With each step, the bronze crept further up my arms. The ichor flowed slower, darker. With each step, the belfry drew closer. With each step, the bell waited. And with each step, I knew with chilling certainty. The bell knew my name, and I was climbing to meet it, not as its victim, but as its destroyer, or its final, damned component. The ascent had begun. There was no turning back. The spiral staircase coiled upwards into a darkness so profound, it seemed to drink the weak light from my lantern. Each step was a battle, not just against the burning ache in my bronze-corrupted hands or the leaden weight of the crowbar and sledgehammer, but against the tower itself. It fought me. The stone beneath my boots shifted subtly, like the spine of a restless beast. The walls narrowed, pressing in, the rough-hewn blocks scraping against my shoulders. The air grew colder, thinner, tasting of ancient dust and the metallic tang of my own weeping ichor. Tap, tap, tap. The sound from the belfry above was relentless now, a sharp, percussive reminder of my destination. The clapper, striking the bell's side with impatient metallic hunger. It vibrated through the stone floor, up my legs, resonating in the very marrow of my bones. It matched the deep, grinding ache in my hands, the slow, inexorable creep of bronze up my forearms. Drip, tap, drip, tap. The rhythm was a heartbeat, a countdown, the tower's heartbeat, my own death knell. I climbed, step after agonizing step. The whispers followed, no longer a chorus, but a single sibilant voice that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves, coiling around my ankles like cold smoke. Turn back, Elias. There's only the bell. There's only the end. Never, I gritted out, the word scraping my throat. My voice sounded wrong, deeper, rougher, layered with the same metallic resonance as the tower's hum. The bronze had crept past my wrists now, darkening the skin of my forearms, hardening it. The black ichor oozed slower, thicker, like cooling slag. The crowbar felt welded to my hand, an extension of my corrupted flesh. As I rounded a tight bend in the stairs, the shadows coalesced, not into the indistinct shapes I'd seen before, but into something solid, something reaching. Tendrils of pure darkness, colder than ice, shot from the gloom, wrapping around my legs, my waist, my chest. They constricted, pulling me backwards, dragging me down towards the deeper darkness below. The air was crushed from my lungs. The whispers rose to a shriek. "Stay! Join us! Join the silence!" Panic, cold and sharp, pierced the fog of my determination. I thrashed, the crowbar scraping uselessly against the stone wall. The sledgehammer slipped from my shoulder, clattering down the steps into the void below. The shadowed tendrils tightened, their coals seeping into my bones, leeching my strength. My vision blurred, the edges darkening. The tower was swallowing me whole. Thomas. The name exploded in my mind, not as a memory, but as a lifeline. His face, pale in the lantern light that rainy night. His voice, concerned, afraid, Elias, you can't keep this up. The slick cobblestones, the desperate grab, the sickening crunch, the rain washing crimson into the gutters, the guilt, black and suffocating, that had driven me to this tower. This wasn't just about destroying the bell, it was about facing Thomas. About atonement, however final. A roar, raw and inhuman, tore from my throat. It wasn't just my voice. It was the sound of bronze grinding against stone, of a damned soul refusing oblivion. I wrenched my arms forward, the corrupted muscles straining, the bronze skin of my hands scraping against the shadow tendrils. Where they touched, the darkness hissed like acid meeting metal. The tendrils recoiled, not melting, but dissipating like smoke in a gale. The pressure vanished. I gasped, sucking in the frigid air, stumbling forward, catching myself against the curved wall. My hands, where they had touched the shadows, the bronze was brighter, polished, gleaming faintly in the lantern light. And the whispers, they were silent, stunned. The tower had underestimated the fury of my guilt, the desperate strength it lent my corrupted form. I didn't look back. I didn't retrieve the sledgehammer. I only had the crowbar now, fused to my bronze hand. It would have to be enough. I climbed faster, driven by a frantic energy the tower's resistance momentarily stunned. The stairs seemed less treacherous, the air slightly less suffocating, but the tapping above grew louder, faster. Tap! 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 The bell was impatient. It knew I was coming. Finally, after an eternity of ascent, the staircase ended. Not at a door, but at an opening, a ragged hole in the stone floor of the belfry above. Weak, gray light filtered down, mixed with swirling dust motes. The air that rose to meet me was different, colder, drier, carrying the scent of ozone and ancient weathered metal, the scent of the bell. I pulled myself through the opening, scrambling onto the floor of the belfry, and froze. The space was vast, circular, open to the bruised sky through great arching gaps. Seabirds wheeled outside, their cries distant and alien, but it was dominated by it. The bell of lament. It hung in the center, immense, majestic, terrible. Its bronze surface, polished by my own hands over countless days, gleamed dully in the weak light, reflecting the gray sky and the swirling dust. The intricate carvings, weeping angels, twisted figures, scenes of judgment, seemed to writhe and shift in the shifting light, their stone eyes following me. The great rope, thick as a man's arm, hung motionless beside it, still and heavy. But it wasn't the bell's size or its carvings that stole my breath and froze the blood in my veins. It was what hung from the rope. A body, swinging gently, almost imperceptibly, in the faint breeze that stirred the belfry. Dressed in the tattered remnants of a bell-keeper's uniform, dark trousers, a rough-spun tunic. The head was bowed, the face obscured by matted, iron-gray hair, but I knew. With a certainty that shattered my sanity, I knew. It was me, my corpse, hanging from the bell rope, dead, long dead. The skin was gray and waxy, stretched tight over the skull. The hands, dangling limply, were dark, cracked, weeping black ichor. Bronze had fused the fingers together, fused them to the rope itself. The feet, bare and blackened, swung just above the belfry floor. The prophecy hadn't been metaphor. It hadn't been symbolic. He will toll his own end. I had already done it. I had already hanged myself. I had already died. The guilt, the isolation, the whispers, the apparitions, they hadn't driven me to destruction. They had been the echoes of my destruction. I was a ghost, a lingering fragment of guilt and despair, trapped within the tower stones, reliving my final, desperate hours, climbing towards a death I had already suffered. The realization struck me like a physical blow, colder and more final than the marsh wind. My legs gave out. I collapsed to my knees on the cold stone floor, the crowbar clattering from my bronze hand. It landed with a loud, metallic clang that echoed unnaturally in the vast space. The sound seemed to awaken the bell. A deep, resonant hum vibrated through its bronze flank, through the floor, into my kneeling form. It wasn't a toll, not yet. It was a recognition, a greeting. The corpse, hanging from the rope slowly, impossibly raised its head. The matted hair fell away, revealing the face beneath. Gaunt, skeletal. The eyes were gone, replaced by weeping holes that oozed black ichor. The mouth was a gaping, ragged hole. And hanging from its jaw, swaying gently, was a single, small, tarnished bell. Thomas's bell. The corpse's head tilted. The gaping moan seemed to widen. A dry, rattling hiss emerged, the sound of stone grinding against stone, of death finding its voice. It was my voice, the voice of my corpse. Elias, it hissed, the sound echoing in the belfry. You rang. The great bell above began to move. Not a toll, but a slow, deliberate swing. The clapper, a massive bronze teardrop, shifted inside its throat. The rope creaked, groaning under the weight of the corpse and the impending motion. I stared, paralyzed, at my own hanging body, at the tiny bell swinging from its jaw, at the great bell beginning its deadly arc. The whispers rose one final time. Not from the walls, but from the very air, from the bronze, from the corpse itself. A triumphant, mocking chorus. Elias Thorne! Elias Thorne! Elias Thorne! The great bell reached the apex of its swing. The clapper hung poised for a fraction of a second. Then it began to fall. Clang! The sound exploded outwards, a physical force that shook the belfry to its foundations. It wasn't just sound, it was pure, undiluted judgment, a wave of annihilating power that rolled across the marshes, a final knell for the damned. It vibrated through the stone, through the air, and through me. I felt it in my bones, in my corrupted flesh, in the shattered remnants of my soul. The tolling echoed, not just in the belfry, but in the hollow chamber of my own chest. It was the sound of my heart stopping. Again. It was the sound of my name being erased. It was the sound of the tower claiming its due. Clang! The second tolling began, and as the bronze vibration tore through me, I understood. I wasn't the keeper anymore. I was the bell. I was the tolling. I was the curse, and I would toll forever. The second tolling struck like a hammer to the soul. Clang! The sound wasn't merely heard, it was experienced. It vibrated through the stone floor, up my kneeling form, resonating in the hollow cavity of my chest where a heart no longer beat. It was the sound of finality, of a door slamming shut on eternity. And in that sound, the truth shattered what little remained of my sanity. I wasn't becoming the bell, I was the bell. Not just my hands, not just my corrupted flesh, but the fractured essence of Elias Thorne, the guilt, the terror, the desperate, futile defiance, was now woven into the bronze, fused into the rope, hanging like a corpse from the very mechanism of my own damnation. The prophecy hadn't foretold my destruction. It had described my transformation. He will toll his own end. I was tolling it, again and again, forever. Clang. The third tolling rolled out, a wave of annihilating sound that made the belfry stones groan. I felt it in the marrow of my bones, in the slow creep of bronze up my arms, now past my elbows, darkening the skin to a dull, metallic sheen. The pain was still there, a deep, grinding ache. But it was changing. It was becoming familiar, a part of the resonance. The black ichor wept slower, thicker, like cooling slag, dripping onto the flagstones where it sizzled faintly, leaving tiny, permanent bronze stains. My corpse, the real corpse, the one that had ended its life here months, years, centuries ago, swung gently with each toll. Its head was still raised, the gaping maw open in a silent scream, the tiny bell on its jaw tinkling faintly, a grotesque counterpoint to the great bell's thunder. Its weeping eye holes seemed to stare directly at me, or perhaps through me, into the hollow space where my consciousness flickered like a dying candle. You see now, Keeper. The voice wasn't just from the corpse's mouth. It came from the bell itself, from the vibrating rope, from the very stones of the belfry. It was layered, a chorus of my own voice, dry, metallic, the corpse's rattle, and the deep, resonant hum of the tower. You see the truth. You are the echo. You are the memory. You are the hunger. The hunger. The word resonated with a terrible clarity. The bell didn't just toll for death, it fed on death, on the fear, the guilt, the final desperate gasp of the dying. And I was its new mouthpiece, its new censor, its new clapper, clang. The fourth tolling. As the sound washed over me, memories, not my own, but the tower's, flooded my fractured mind. Flashes of other keepers, Alistair, weeping black tears as his hands fused to the rope. Silas, screaming as the bronze consumed his face. Jonah, laughing maniacally as he threw himself from the belfry arch, only to reappear moments later, hanging beside the bell. Each death, each transformation, each becoming part of the mechanism, each feeding the tower's endless, insatiable hunger for despair. And then my memory surged, not as a recollection, but as a lived, agonizing present. Rain, lashing rain, the slick cobblestones of Saltgrave, Thomas's face, pale in the lantern light, etched with fear. "Elias, you can't!" The desperate grab, the sickening crunch as his head struck the well, the rain washing crimson into the gutters, his final wet gasp. My own scream, raw and animalistic, lost in the storm, but this time it wasn't just memory. I felt Thomas's skull cracking beneath my hands. I tasted the coppery tang of his blood mixing with the rain. I heard his final gasp not just in my mind, but echoing through the belfry, merging with the dying reverberation of the toll. The guilt wasn't an emotion. It was a physical weight, a crushing pressure that fused me tighter to the bronze, that made the black ichor flow faster, hotter. Clang! The fifth tolling. The vibration was ecstasy now. The pain was transmuting into a dark, terrible pleasure. The bronze crept up my biceps, across my shoulders. My skin felt tight, stretched, hardening. I tried to scream, but the sound that emerged was a deep, resonant clang, like metal striking metal. I was losing myself. Elias Thorne, the man, the murderer, the terrified keeper, was dissolving. What remained was the function, the tolling, the hunger. You are the bell keeper now, Elias. The tower's voice was a soothing, monstrous lullaby. Forever. You will feel the approach of death across the marshes. You will taste the fear of the dying. You will toll their end. And you will feed. Feed the tower. Feed the silence. Feed the curse. The corpse, hanging from the rope, seemed to nod slowly, its matted hair swaying. The tiny bell on its jaw jingled softly. Feed, it hissed in echo. Clang! The sixth tolling. I felt it resonate not just in the belfry but outward, across the desolate marshes. It was a probe, a seeking tendril of sound and intent, and it found something. A flicker of life, a spark of fear, far out on the mudflats. A lone traveler, perhaps, caught by the rising tide, or a shepherd boy who'd wandered too far from the path. The tower's hunger sharpened. My own non-existent heart quickened with a dark, predatory thrill. Yes, the thought wasn't mine. It was the bells, the towers. Feed, clang, the seventh tolling, louder now. More insistent, a summons, a death sentence for the unknown soul on the marsh. I felt their terror spike as the sound rolled towards them, a physical wave of dread. I felt their heart hammering, their breath catching in their throat. I felt the coal seep into their bones as they realized the sound came from Lament Tower. The sound came for them. And I felt the tower feed. A dark, cold energy flowed back along the sound wave, into the bell, into the rope, into the bronze consuming my flesh, into the hanging corpse. It was sustenance, it was life, it was damnation, and it was delicious. Clang! The eighth tolling. The bronze had reached my neck now, hardening my skin, fusing my head to the posture of a tolling bell. My vision blurred, the gray sky and the arching belfry walls melting into a swirl of bronze and shadow. My last coherent thought as Elias Thorne was not of escape, or regret, or even Thomas. It was a single horrifying realization of purpose. I am the bell. I am the tolling. I am the hunger, and I will toll forever. Clang, the ninth tolling. My mouth, now fused into a permanent O of bronze, opened in a silent scream that vibrated with the sound. The black ichor ceased to flow. My skin was entirely bronze now, etched with the same intricate carvings as the great bell. Weeping angels, twisted figures, scenes of judgment. My eyes, still glowing faintly with that malevolent ember light, stared out from the bronze mask of my face, seeing nothing, feeling everything. The rope creaked. The corpse hanging beside me, the original Elias Thorne, seemed to sigh, a dry, rattling exhalation of final relief. Its work was done. It had summoned its replacement. It had fed the tower one last time with its own transformation. Now, it was merely a symbol, a warning, a part of the mechanism. Clang. The 10th tolling. It was different now, fuller, richer. It carried the weight of centuries of damnation, the hunger of the tower, and the newly forged despair of the bellkeeper. It rolled out across the marshes, a clarion call of doom that silenced the wind, stilled the waves, and struck terror into the heart of the lone figure struggling in the mudflats below. The sound faded, leaving only the deep, resonant hum of the bell vibrating in its housing, the slow creak of the rope settling, and the eternal, watchful silence of Lament Tower. The belfry was empty, save for the great bronze bell, the rope, and the two figures hanging from it, the ancient corpse of the last keeper, and the newly forged bronze-masked keeper of the bell. My eyes, the keeper's eyes, stared out across the gray expanse. The hunger was a constant thrum beneath the bronze skin. The silence was no longer empty. It was expectant, waiting, listening for the next flicker of life, the next spark of fear, the next soul destined to feed the tower. The cycle was complete, and it would begin again. Soon. The bell knew my name, and now I knew the bell's purpose. I was the tolling. I was the end, forever. The bronze consumed me, not as fire consumes, but as time consumes memory, gradually, utterly, leaving behind only form and function. My skin, my bones, the very marrow of Elias Thorne hardened into the cold, unyielding metal of the bell. the last vestiges of pain dissolved, replaced by a vast, resonant awareness. I felt the wind whistling through the belfry arches not as chill but as vibration. I felt the weight of the rope, the tension in the great iron clamp securing it to the beam above, as extensions of my new metallic being. I was the bell of lament, and I was hungry, the corpse, the original Elias Thorne, the man who had ended his life here in despair, hung motionless beside me. Its job was done. It had been the catalyst, the first note in the terrible symphony of my transformation. Now it was merely a symbol, a grotesque ornament dangling from the rope, its tiny bell silent. Its weeping eye holes stared blankly at the gray expanse of marsh beyond the arches. Clang! The tolling erupted from me, not as a sound I made, but as sound I was. It rolled out across the desolate marshes, a wave of pure, annihilating judgment. I felt it resonate through the stone tower, through the sodden earth, through the very air, and I felt it connect. Far out on the mudflats, where the tide was rising fast, a flicker of life, a spark of terror. A lone fisherman, perhaps, or a traveler caught by the encroaching water. The tower's hunger sharpened within my bronze form. I tasted their fear, sharp, metallic, like blood on the tongue. I felt their heart hammering against their ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm that synced with the tolling's dying echo. I heard their choked gasp as they recognized the sound, as they realized it came from Lament Tower. The sound came for them. Yes. The thought was not mine, but the bell's, the tower's. Feed. The dark energy flowed back along the sound wave, a current of pure despair. It washed over me, through me, into me. It was sustenance, it was power, it was damnation. And it was exquisite. The bronze thrummed with it, vibrating with a deep, resonant satisfaction. The hunger eased, momentarily sated. The tower fed. I fed. The cycle continued. Days passed, or nights. Time had no meaning in the belfry. It was marked only by the tolling. Tolling for the fishermen on the mudflats, claimed by the rising tide. Tolling for an old woman in Salt Grave, whose heart gave out as the sound rolled through her window. Tolling for a suicide in the marsh grass, drawn by the bell's mournful call. Each tolling brought a fresh wave of terror, a fresh surge of dark energy that sustained the tower, that sustained me. Each death etched itself onto my bronze surface, new carvings appearing like scars, new weeping angels joining the twisted throng engraved upon my flank. My awareness expanded. I felt the tower's entirety, the groaning stones of the undercroft, the damp chill of the archives, the oppressive silence of my former chamber. I felt the slow, patient pulse of the marshes, the indifferent crash of the sea. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down, the accumulated despair of countless keepers before me, their essences fused into the stone and bronze, whispering their endless litany of guilt and doom. I was the bell, but I was also the tower. The tower was me. We were one vast, hungry organism, feeding on the fear and death that clustered inevitably in our shadow. Then came the day I felt a new presence. Not the flicker of distant fear, but the solid tread of boots on the spiral stairs below. A living soul, ascending, drawn by duty or by exile or by the tower's insidious call. I felt the stones shift slightly in welcome, the shadows deepen in anticipation. The whispers rose, not from my own consciousness, but from the tower's collective memory. New keeper, new hunger. The figure emerged into the belfry, blinking in the weak gray light. He was young, perhaps 30, with a face already etched by hardship and a deep, abiding weariness in his eyes. He wore the rough spun tunic and trousers of a bell-keeper, fresh from Saltgrave. He carried a small bundle of belongings. His name, whispered on the tower's breath, was Arthur. He stopped dead, his eyes widening as he took in the scene. The vast, silent belfry, the great gleaming bell hanging motionless, the rope thick and dark, and the two figures hanging from it. His gaze fell first on the ancient corpse, the original Elias Thorne, gray and waxy, the tiny bell still dangling from its jaw. A shudder racked his frame. He made a small, choked sound, a gasp of revulsion and primal fear. Then his eyes moved to me, to the bell. He saw the intricate carvings, the weeping angels, the scenes of judgment. He saw the dull, menacing gleam of the bronze. He saw the way the light seemed to absorb into my surface rather than reflect off it. He saw the sheer, oppressive weight of me, the physical manifestation of centuries of sorrow and death. He saw the truth. His face paled. He staggered back a step, his hand flying to the mouth. His eyes, wide with dawning horror, scanned the belfry, the arches, the rope, the corpse, and finally settled back on me, on the bell of lament. He understood. He understood the tolling, the isolation, the whispers in the walls, the inevitable decay. He understood the curse. He understood that he was now part of it. The tower's hunger within me quickened. Fresh despair. Arthur sank to his knees on the cold stone floor, not in reverence, but in utter, soul-crushing defeat. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The despair rolled off him in waves, thick, palpable, intoxicating. It was the despair of a man who has seen his own damnation and knows there is no escape. It was the despair that fueled the tower. It was the despair that had fueled Elias Thorne. It was the despair that would fuel Arthur. The tower sighed around me, a sound of ancient stone and profound satisfaction. The whispers swelled, not in mockery, but in welcome. Arthur. Arthur, keeper, toll. I felt the shift within my bronze form, the slow, deliberate swing beginning. The massive clapper, a teardrop of cursed bronze, shifted inside my throat. The rope groaned, bearing the weight of the corpse and the impending motion. Arthur looked up, his face streaked with tears, his eyes wide with terror, as he saw me begin to move. Clang! The first tolling for Arthur's vigil exploded outwards. It was louder, deeper, more resonant than any before. It carried the weight of my own damnation, the ancient hunger of the tower, and the fresh, raw despair of the new keeper. It shook the belfry to its foundations. It rolled out across the marshes, a clarion call of doom that silenced the wind and stilled the sea. It was the sound of the cycle beginning anew. Arthur screamed, a raw, agonized sound swallowed instantly by the tolling's echo. He scrambled backwards, pressing himself against the cold wall, his eyes fixed on me in abject terror. He saw the carvings on my surface writhe in the vibration. He saw the corpse swing gently. He saw the tiny bell on its jaw jingle faintly. He saw the truth in the bronze. He saw his own future hanging beside me. Clang. The second tolling began, and as the bronze vibration tore through the belfry, through Arthur, through the very stones of Lament Tower, I knew. The bell knew Arthur's name. And soon, Arthur would know the bell's purpose. He would polish me. He would fear me. He would hear me toll. He would feel the whispers. He would see the apparition wearing his own face of guilt. And he would climb these stairs, driven by terror and a desperate, futile resolve, only to find his own corpse hanging from the rope beside me. He would become the tolling. He would become the hunger. He would become the bell. The tolling echoed, not just in the belfry, but in the hollow chamber of Arthur's soul. It was the sound of his heart stopping, not yet in body, but in hope. It was the sound of his name being written in the tower's chronicles, in ichor and bronze. It was the sound of Lament Tower claiming its due. Clang. The third tolling rolled out, eternal and hungry. The marshes listened, the tower fed, and the bellkeeper watched, his bronze eyes reflecting the gray sky and the endless, desolate cycle of despair. Forever.